You're listening to The Local Maximum, episode 301.
Time to expand your perspective. Welcome to The Local Maximum. Now, here's your host, Max Sklar.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome. You have reached another Local Maximum. All right. Today, we're going to listen to part 2 of my discussion with Aaron following recent events in the Middle East. But surprisingly, this is a much lighter discussion and a much more fun discussion than we had last time. And it's literally the same discussion, just occurred the same night. So go figure. We start with the reaction to world events. So I guess that's the reason the first part was the events themselves. But then we get to the reaction to the world's events in the rest of the world and the cultural contradictions stemming from that. Don't get me wrong; it's not totally light. Some of it is a little bit concerning, but it's helpful to have some gallows humor, I guess. It ends with my review of the movie Dumb Money, and we start talking about movies and entertainment in general. I guess stream of consciousness. So some thoughts on our changing culture, I suppose. Let's have a listen. Let's talk about another issue that is closer to home that we've been dealing with, which is the reaction here in the United States, in the world, because we've been seeing a ton of Hamas rallies, what I'm calling Hamas rallies. They're really like Free Palestine rallies, but I look at them, those are not peace rallies. Those are not hippies saying, hey man, everyone's just gotta, stop making war and stuff. No, these are like, these are kind of scary, to be honest. And they're happening in college campuses, probably close to you in Harvard over there. And even in New York City, to some respect, and in places like London and Paris. And it's amazing how, and again, I'm not the only one to point this out, but it's important to point it out. Our corporations have been for years being like, nobody deserves to be microaggressed against. You can't offend anybody. And, if something bad happens, we're going to get on and say, like my CEO, the CEO of Foursquare, after January 6th, like the next day, he wrote us an email like, today, January 6th, 2021 is a day that will live in infamy. The army of Trump tried to take over the government, and this will not stand. Like he thought he was a freaking FDR over there, and it was the most ridiculous thing. And now they have nothing to say, and it's a lot of people have pointed that out, and it's really I think it's a wake up call to a lot of people, even to a lot of people who were involved. Even to a lot of people who supported these corporations early on are now starting to think, what's going on here?
Yeah, well, and I don't know if it's a uniquely American trait, but it certainly runs deep in the American conscious that we love to root for an underdog, and the Palestinians certainly seem like an oppressed underdog here in the way that they're being portrayed globally, and there's some truth to that in that they're somewhat ghettoized in Gaza, and life there is tough, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're justified in any actions they take as a result of that. And I think people are too fixated on the first part, and so they pick up and run with the second part without thinking too hard about it.
So I hate to bring this up, but maybe I could get your take on it. If I could dispense with this idea entirely, that would be great, but I don't think I can, which is like, especially when you see this stuff in Europe, it almost looks like, is this the emergence of like the latent Nazism? Is it sort of the same kind of thing? Like, you read about some of the stuff that was going on.
Well, I mean, Barry Weiss has been talking for years about a undercurrent of anti-Semitism, of soft anti-Semitism in the American left, and I don't think she's entirely off base there. I think that it's a little ironic that the people who are all enthused about punching Nazis are also not too upset with the idea of exterminating the Jews or bringing an end to the state of Israel. So and maybe they wouldn't put it that way, but they've chosen some strange bedfellows.
Yeah, I mean, I do see a lot of again. I'd love to have someone talk me out of this, but I do. But when I look at the history of the 30s and the type of rhetoric that was used, there was a lot of boycott Palestine, boycott and divest Palestine, which is kind of interesting to read about because back then that meant boycott the Jews, boycott right. Israel today. Palestine meant the Jews.
Even in the 2000s, there was was it the was it the BDS movement? The boycott, divest, and
that's what I'm talking about.
S was for, but
sanction. Yeah, they still have that. But is there a straight line between the BDS movement of the 30s to now? I don't know. I'd like to talk to someone who could give me a better perspective on that. Yeah, exactly. All right. So I was actually on an interesting Zoom call on, I believe it was on Wednesday. Was it on Wednesday? Shoot, I don't remember what it was. Let me look it up to the date just so that we get the anyway, it was something like
earlier this week.
Yeah, maybe it was the 12th or something of October with the Slifka Center at Yale. Now, at Harvard, there were a whole bunch of organizations who put out this letter. It's one thing to say if there was a letter that said, "Man, we feel really bad for the people in Gaza, let's minimize civilian casualties." I would agree with all that, but it almost seemed to be like supportive of what they had done, and like the number of organizations that signed on to that was, and I don't know if I almost feel like it's a mix between people who actually believe that crap and are just totally out of it, and then a bunch of people who just have no moral discrimination and will just sign on to anything that's presented to them.
There were certainly people who claimed, "Oh, I didn't actually read that before I signed it." Okay. What if? It's not like this isn't the end use authorization agreement. This is a little bit different.
Yeah, exactly. So, fortunately, at Yale, you've seen a lot less of that. Not as a Yale alum, I'm very surprised that they are not as bad as Harvard in this respect, but pleasantly surprised. Actually, the president of Harvard, the previous president, Larry Summers, put on Twitter something to the effect of, "This is not the Harvard I know." And then a lot of people wrote back like, "What are you talking about? This is exactly the Harvard."
Now,
just blind to it the whole time.
Historically, I know the Ivies have a reputation of back in the pre-war years, they had quotas for Jews and stuff like that. Is Yale known for being particularly more friendly to Jewish students than Harvard, or not noticeably that. So?
But so okay, I went.
I wasn't sure if there was a rereputation there.
Yeah, I know that there are a lot of Jews that go there. When I went there, I had no problem finding Jews, and the Slifka Center is the Jewish the Jewish community center, effectively, that I lived next door to, which just wasn't my choice. It was where my dorm was, which I kind of want to go back there now and have some of the food. That food is pretty good. But a lot of people eat there, even people who weren't Jewish. It was like a potential cafeteria. Muslims ate there because to eat halal.
Kosher and halal are very similar.
Yeah, a funny story, which is difficult to kind of figure out whether this was a bad thing or not at the time, was that Yale allowed someone to come to Yale who was a former high-ranking official in the Taliban, and he would eat at the Slivka Center. Okay, so
as a student or like a lecturer, or
as a student, yeah. I think it turned out that the Taliban have some very young, high-ranking officials, but yeah, it's hard to know what to think of that. But I don't want to get into that. But anyway, I went on their Zoom the other day. They seem to be they seem to be thinking that the administration is supportive of them. They do talk about this one professor, Zarina Gurwal, who said on Twitter on that day, on October 7th, "It's been an extraordinary day. Palestinians have every right to resist through armed struggles, solidarity, all that stuff." And what's interesting is that, do you remember back in 2014 when this Yale professor, Erica Christakis, there was a letter going around where they were like, "Oh no, don't wear a Halloween costume. That's going to be offensive and cultural appropriation." And
I don't remember the professor's name, but I do remember that being a incident that kind of blew up at Yale.
Yeah. So basically she said, which is something that was probably the right answer, which is what Yale had done for many years, especially when I went there, is, we trust students to make their own decisions when it comes to their Halloween costume. And people just went nuts. And at the time I looked up, well, what were the bad Halloween costumes? Come on, I want to know what they are. It turns out it was all theoretical. There weren't any real Halloween costumes. And the fact that, people made such a big deal out of this that they essentially hounded her out of her position to resign from her position. I think it was a position in the Yale College system, in the dormitory position. She was, I think she was married to, I forget, Professor Christakis. I forgot his first name, but he wrote a book. Oh my God, the book's on my shelf. So I should be able to look at it right now. Okay, this is driving me crazy. I have to look at what it. Nicholas Christakis, right? So he was what was then called the master of Silliman College. Now it's called the head, because unfortunately we can't tell the difference between two different meanings of words. So they basically had to resign that position in terms of student life, because I think the story went the Yale administration didn't really force them to do it, but the Yale administration wasn't particularly supportive either, and was kind of allowing them to be harassed. So what I'm surprised by, so first of all, this professor Grewal, who's supporting this Hamas attack, apparently was one of the harassers back in the day of this professor. So it's not like she believes in free speech. And secondly, people on the Yale campus still remember that very well 10 years from now. And that one incident is kind of how things are measured against. It's like, well, look what happens there and look where you are now. So I think, back then it was kind of like, oh, this is going to happen and people are going to forget and people are just going to get used to it. And there's something about the fact that people still bring it up 10 years from now and it has not healed. Like, okay, they're going to be forced, Yale is going to be forced to contend with their policy and way of thinking on matters of free speech sooner rather than later. Interestingly enough, the Harvard president, when confronted with all of these petitions, is like, well, free speech is what we're all about. And it's like, yes, I agree with that. I want that to be true, but are you just pretending that the last 6 years never happened, where there were a lot of things you can't say and there are a lot of things you can't do? Imagine protesting against the COVID restrictions. Imagine protesting against imagine saying all lives matter. You would not be allowed on that campus anymore if you just uttered those three words. I promise you. So, whereas when I was at Yale, you could say some things that probably you shouldn't say, and it was fine back in 2004. But that's where we are, and it seems like there is something about the fact that it almost seemed like before that they're just going to keep contradicting themselves, and they're going to get away with it. But it does seem like they're running up against some barrier where the contradictions are getting too great to, to not notice or to sweep under the rug. Although historically, that rabbit hole for me has gone way deeper than I ever imagined. And every time I think it's going to turn around, it just goes deeper. But it does feel like there's been a sea change in that now. So I don't know.
It'll be very interesting to see where things go next. And I think when we were talking earlier this week, I mentioned that I got an email from my children's. I don't recall if it was from the school board or the superintendent, but from the public schools, about how to talk to your children about what's going on, in Israel right now. And I was relieved that it was a very, for lack of a better term, nonpartisan, that it was more about like how to not freak your kids out and how to not panic them about things, and how to let them, like, don't tell them what you think they need to know. Let them guide the conversation. And there was nothing in there that was overtly, pro-Israel or pro-Palestine or anti-anyone. And so that was a relief, because I could see in certain communities, it not so far from where I live, taking a very strong stance that would make me uncomfortable.
Yeah. I mean, at this point, I have such a low barrier. Like, I'm thinking I'm going to open up one of these letters, like how to talk to your children about Trump's energy policy. You're all going to be dead by the time you're 25 because of it. But that's the kind of talk we got for many years. All right. Yeah. So as a bonus, yesterday,
changing gears.
Yeah. So yesterday, although I think I'm going to divide up this episode into two parts. So maybe this is a week and a day ago. I saw the movie Dumb Money. Now, that's a movie about the GameStop short squeeze in early 2001, when some retail investors, particularly on Reddit, noticed that, GameStop is not going under, and the amount of short selling by large hedge funds is way larger than the price of the stock. So we can, I'm not going to explain all this.
Someone was in over their head and they noticed.
Yeah. So they started buying, and people kind of started buying that stock to stick it to the man, and it shot up like 100x or something like that. And the movie had some good actors in it. Paul Dano, who I know from, he was actually the Riddler from that last Batman movie a couple of years ago, and he was scary as the Riddler, like as a as kind of a criminally insane person. But here he was just like a kind of a fun sort of working class guy from Boston, and he did a really good job with that. And his brother was played by Pete Davidson, and I thought it was pretty good. It was amusing. I did not know that the CEO of Point 72, which is the hedge fund. So the hedge fund that got in over their head was Melvin Capital, and the owner of that was played by Seth Rogen, and he was bailed out by the CEO of Point 72. So this was in the movie. I didn't know this was real, that he had, and they kind of, I think the pet pig was like a long time ago, so it wasn't during the time, but they kind of moved it up. He had a pet pig that was allowed to wander around in his mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut, that he would kind of feed. So that was interesting. And I don't know have you ever been to Greenwich, Aaron? Because it's right next to me here in Stamford.
I haven't spent much time there, but I've occasionally driven through by accident and been. We did not grow up in a poor town, but
no,
compared to Greenwich, it felt like we were living out in the boonies, on the cheap. That place is fancy,
right? Because Weston has a lot more. Weston has some crazy big houses. Don't get me wrong, but it also has some more like regular houses, I guess, and it's a little bit less expensive because it's a little further in. But no, Greenwich. So what? Like I feel like it's sort of like when you sort of accidentally get off the highway in the Bronx and you're like, oh man, I am in some neighborhood that is just, I shouldn't be here right now. But when I get off the highway accidentally in Greenwich, I feel like I'm in the ghetto for billionaires. It's like houses, it's castles essentially.
I know exactly what you mean. It sounds ridiculous, but yes.
I know. And what's funny is like, it's only 3 miles from here where I moved. So, I have to walk through an area that's a little bit, if I wanted to walk there, I'd have to walk through an area that is a little bit iffy. But which, I mean, it's not that bad. I drive through. It's not like, it's not like think of the worst cities. It's not like that. But anyway, I thought that was interesting. I actually thought those guys, the CEO of Point 72 and Seth Rogen's character, who were the big hedge funds who were in over their head, they came off as like very like detached and not living in the real world. But they didn't come off as villains. They just, to me, they came off as like people who were just doing their job as like the rich guys in the system, but they weren't necessarily architects of it. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they're supposed to being portrayed worse than they are, but it didn't really seem that way. And also, I didn't look into it, but my dad does some of this stuff, and he told me that those guys ended up not losing that money in the end anyway by because of the rules that they were able to manipulate and change. The Robinhood founders, on the other hand, so Robinhood was the app by which normal people buy and sell stock. Right. I don't know if you've used it. I should use it. I
have not.
Okay. Well, yeah. Given that my dad is a stockbroker and still working, I can't go through it. But their founders in the movie came off as so douchey. It was like they were almost one of the villains. Because remember, Robinhood, once that stock got to a certain level and the hedge funds were hurting, Robinhood paused buys. You weren't allowed to buy it anymore.
Right. Which a lot of people thought was a little sketchy.
Yeah. And they came off as like, oh, we really wanted to make this app because we saw Occupy Wall Street and we want the regular person to to be able to buy stocks. They just came off as like so so now I don't know them in real life, but I feel like from the video I saw of them in real life, they got them spot on, and it was pretty funny. But what was more interesting, and probably will be interesting to a lot of people out there, this is the first movie I've seen that really portrayed the COVID era outside it. And I know there were a lot of like doomers in COVID era, like, oh, all the bad things they did to us, it'll be seen as great, and no one will ever, no one will ever question it. And it'll be like, thank God we all wore masks, and that, that did it. But that is not how this movie portrayed the COVID regime at all. And unless there's some subtle thing I'm missing, because, one of the characters was actually, who was buying GameStop stock, was actually someone who worked at a GameStop, but didn't really like his job particularly. And he had the boss kept saying like, mask on, like if he just like put it a little bit below his mouth just to say something so that he could be heard. And one of the characters was I hope I'm not giving away too much of the movie, am I? So yeah, there was a little thing with the forced, I think there was a little statement about the forced vaccinations in there. And so I thought that was very interesting that movies that portray the COVID regime, which hadn't been happening during it, like, during World War II, there were movies portraying World War II. Here, you didn't have that. But I was kind of surprised at how critical it was.
So related to that, I just recently went back and started watching. I haven't seen the last 2 seasons, most recent 2 seasons of Billions. And so I've just watched the first couple episodes of season 6, which came out in January of 2022, but as a result was filmed in 2021, kind of at peak COVID. And there's people wearing masks in it, but I think the bigger underlying current was they really grasped onto the zeitgeist of we got to go after the billionaires because they're the real problem, which I guess was very much in the air at that period. And at first I was a little a little disappointed with that. I'm like, oh, come on, guys, are you just going to play into this kind of populist backlash here? But then when I thought more about it, I said, well, the character espousing this view is the Attorney General of the state of New York. So that's actually pretty much right on.
Paul Giamatti. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so
back to Dumb Money.
Well, yeah. So just one thing that as you know, I was on the campaign trail with my cousin Jordan, and there's a scene where the Roaring Kitty, who's the guy who was on Reddit telling people to buy GameStop, he was practicing to testify before Congress, and his his doofus brother was there, making fun of him the whole time, and so. When we did debate prep with my cousin Jordan and his brothers were there, that kind of reminded me exactly of that. So that was pretty funny. I don't think this is going to come up in the campaign in California. Who knows? Maybe it will. But Jordan, even though you've got to see that. It's pretty funny. Okay, so I give that movie a pretty high rating. Overall, I think it dragged on a little. It was an hour and 45 minutes, which doesn't seem like a long movie, but I felt like it dragged. So maybe it wasn't. It
could have been a little bit tighter.
Yeah. There were a lot of internet memes, and there was a lot of montages of internet memes, which I guess that's the only way you could portray some of this. And they probably had so many examples they wanted to fit it all in, but I don't know. That would kind of put it down to 3 stars for me. But I'd say if any of this sounds intriguing to you, I'd love to get your thoughts on it. See Dumb Money and let me know what you think.
2 thoughts. One is, that's an interesting, because I can't think of many movies that have incorporated memes other than like kind of a wink and a nod of fan service. But this sounds very different than that. And since, memes have become very much the medium of communication for I don't know if a generation is the right term, but they've become very prominent in the last 5 years ish, 10 years ish. But we really haven't seen that being captured in film, to my knowledge. So interesting to see how that might shape up. The other angle on that, I have completely lost my train of thought.
So there was memes, right? And memes, COVID? No.
It was. So I thought there were some other movies, in production or coming out soon as well that dealt with the GameStop fiasco.
Interesting.
Is that the case, or am I misremembering?
To be honest, Aaron, I feel like there doesn't need to be a second movie about this one. There could be a second movie about the COVID era for sure. I'm sure there'll be a lot more in the days ahead, but I don't know if we could do. I guess they kind of come in pairs, don't they? But yeah, I don't.
Right.
I don't know.
I guess there was a documentary. Was it Rise of the Players? When did that come out? Back in 2022. So that's a little bit different. Not a dramatization.
Yeah. Speaking of which, by the way, now that we're in the, I guess, post-COVID era, when did the post-COVID era start? So a lot of people say the Russian invasion of Ukraine marks the post-COVID era.
Well, that is a cynical view, because it certainly changed what people were putting in their Twitter profiles and
exactly
and photos. A hashtag the current thing view on current events would very much mark that as the transition point.
Yeah, I think so too. So a year and a half. But where was I going with this? I was saying, now that we're out of the COVID era, I don't even know. What other? Was I going to ask what other films and stuff are coming out? Oh, no. I know what I'm going to talk about. You know what I like now is that the movies are becoming, it's worth going to the movies again. I felt like we didn't go to the movies so much during the COVID era, because who wants to sit there in a mask all day? Or the whole time. And then secondly, the movies just weren't that good for a few years. There hasn't been a good comedy since Well, there have been a few good comedies since 2013. The only one I could think of is like Death of Stalin. There have been some comedies, but we have been in a dearth of comedies. But and maybe that's still true, but I feel like there have been some good movies coming out the last few years. We're going to the theater now and enjoying the movie.
I'd say the moment that
your odds are higher.
That cinema was back in the game in terms of actually going to the theater was the success of Barbie and Oppenheimer this summer. Neither of which I've seen yet, but that definitely marked the people will actually do this again.
Yeah, and a little bit last year with Everything Everywhere All at Once. Although I didn't get into that movie so much. It was good, but I wasn't. It didn't make me hop back into the movies. But now I saw previews. I saw there's a Ridley Scott Napoleon coming out, which is, think of like a Napoleon era Gladiator, I guess. And, there's a new Scorsese movie coming out. And I'm like, oh my God, we got to see all of these. So I'm very excited. I don't know if we're going to do a movie,
segment,
movie segment, but yeah, maybe that'll be a little lighter than Probability Distribution of the Week segment, which I think we've taken
exhausted.
We've exhausted our probabilities, and we're going to get a lot more technical too in the last few days. So maybe ending it with over the next few months. So maybe ending it with a movie segment is probably a good idea. Good excuse to go to the movies. And you too, you could do your own movie review. All right. I think that's it for tonight. I hope you enjoyed the discussion on the movie, but I hope that you found our discussion on the war in the Middle East, at least you got something out of it that you didn't get out from other podcasts. And I I'm not here to provide, I wish I could provide more. We provide some moral clarity, but there are other people who are better to do that, or some context maybe I could provide. I'm not really good at, on the like kind of spiritual advice type thing, but which I kind of think people need right now. But
it's from where we're sitting, it's hard to point at actionable actions. That's poorly phrased, but things that we as individuals can do. Right. There's not much that I can grasp there. My only hope is that all the doom scrolling and staying up late at night, looking at the internet and worrying about this that I have done in the past week, means that our listeners don't have to do the same. So perhaps we can provide that service to you. And
honestly, I wouldn't recommend it because of all the fog of war type stuff, and you have the same types of things going over and over again. Just check in every once in a while. And hopefully I will be in touch with people in that region to get, personal stories like I did in the Ukraine. It's going to be a little different this time because in Ukraine, I had my whole list from the data science summer school, but I'll see what I can do.
And it would be fascinating to know if we have any listeners in either Israel or Palestine.
I pretty sure we do, in Israel at least. So definitely let us know, and hopefully, and definitely do either a call in or or send me some text about what your experience is right now, so that I could read it on the show. All right, thanks everyone. Have a great week. All right. By the way, I would have people on either side of the border over there. On the show, I was just speaking from personal experience with my audience. Again, it might actually be tougher to find these voices for me this time around for reasons that I stated. All right. Next week, I want to talk about our tech retreat, which I just got back from. I just got back from Sturbridge Village, where I had a tech retreat of, I think it was 9 people, and we did our predictions for the future in the lobby of the Hampton Inn in Sturbridge Village. And then yesterday, Sunday, we did, I toured old Sturbridge Village. So that was kind of fun. We're going to talk about that a little bit. And those predictions episodes, they're not always the most popular for some reason, but I find future predictions so fascinating, and figuring out where we were wrong. We've been doing those predictions for nearly 9 years now. So see where we're wrong, see where we're right. Tech predictions, cultural predictions, always fun. And then in a future episode, we're going to get to talk about ancient Egypt. So get ready for that. Have a great week, everyone. That's the show. To support the Local Maximum, sign up for exclusive content and our online community at maximum.locals.com. The Local Maximum is available wherever podcasts are found. If you want to keep up, remember to subscribe on your podcast app. Also, check out the website with show notes and additional materials at localmaxradio.com. If you want to contact me, the host, send an email to localmaxradio@gmail.com. Have a great week.
Feel the power.